So we're here with Jay Holland. He's the youth pastor at Covenant Fellowship Church. Jay, thanks for joining us for this interview.
Good to be here.
We're going to ask Jay a couple of questions that you guys have been wrestling with in your class this week. So let's go ahead and get into it. Jay,
Sure.
How do you deal with discouragement? And what is your plan for dealing with discouragement in ministry? Because it happens to all of us.
Right.
We work hard, we stress to do what we got to do, and nobody seems to appreciate it. And all of a sudden we're dealing with discouragement. So what are some of the things you do to deal with that?
I go to our youth leader network meetings, and and we all get to tell our sob stories of what stinks at our church. But you hear encouraging things too. Actually, there is some truth to that. Just I've been a youth pastor in 3 different cities over the course of about 15 to 18 years, and the areas where I can have a network of other youth pastors who are kind of going through the same struggles, that really does help, because you realize that you're not alone. You realize that for every victory you have, it's so easy to focus on what's not happening and what's not going well. And so just being able to talk, and if you're in an area where you don't have that strong network, that's a nice thing about phones, about staying in contact with people that are out of the area. So that's a big one. The other thing, just personally, that I have found in dealing with discouragement is a regular habit of journaling, so that I can go back and look through and see in the past how God's brought me out of things, in the past challenges that I thought I was going to have that never materialized, or that materialized and then see that I'm on the other side and God brought me through. And in particular, I think it's in Isaiah, a little passage where one of the things that it mentions is that God gives us the garments of praise for a spirit of heaviness. And so one of the things I'll specifically do is just begin to list and write out all of the things that I have to be thankful for. And I know it sounds very, very basic, because it is. But when you get to, you spend 15, 20 minutes doing that, you get to an end and you've got hundreds of things that the Lord has done and blessed and moved in your life. I think that it just tends to lift my spirit.
Awesome. That's great stuff. I know for me, dealing with discouragement is one of the things that, like you said, going around other youth pastors talking about stuff, you can leave so encouraged by guys who are doing the ministry themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's great stuff.
By the way, one of the things I would say to that is I've also learned to stop trying to deal with conflict through email, because that just exacerbates it. Email or text, if there's anything that could possibly be perceived wrong, it's going to be perceived wrong. And then I can't tell you how many nights I've been up at 2 or 3 in the morning reading and rereading the way somebody wrote something and thinking about their motivation, and then typing it and then deleting it and retyping it, then finally sending it thinking I got everything right, and it just was gasoline on the situation. So
that happens like all over the internet, right?
Yeah.
Twitter and social media, people say something, it gets taken out of context.
There's no tone, there's no feedback in it. So, at bare minimum, a phone conversation, but if you can at all, personally handle something. And so one of the ways of getting out of discouragement is don't let yourself get into those situations, because they will absolutely bring it.
For sure. Jay, do you have someone in your life that you kind of put as a mentor or pastor to you, maybe outside the church, that's not directly involved in your ministry, but someone that you can kind of go to and who ministers to you personally? I think that's really important for guys to have someone outside of their context, not their senior pastor, not their youth leaders, but someone that they can go to.
Well, actually, when I was first in youth ministry, I graduated college, and in my first 2 to 3 years, I think I was 21 years old, and didn't really have anybody specifically in my church at that time that felt like a good mentor, that just I could be free to bounce things off of, and also that there were a number of things that I wanted to emulate in them. But there was actually a pastor of a little country church between my house and my church. And I think their church had like 60 people in it. But this guy loved the Lord, was well-versed in the Bible, very, very disciplined and regimented in his time. And I just asked him, hey, can I come over? I have Thursday mornings off. Can I come over and just sit and stare at you and talk about whatever comes up? And so for about 1.5 years, until he moved away, I did that, and there was never an agenda. with it. But it just really helped getting another perspective. And I think one of the things, even back to the discouragement question, here was a guy who loved the Lord, who knew more about the Bible than I would ever know, and was faithfully ministering in a church that was never getting above 100 people. And to see that he still was consistent in his faith and in his time with the Lord really taught me a lot. And since then, there have been times where I've had specific mentors, specific people, and sometimes it's not, I want to emulate everything in their life. Sometimes it's an aspect of their life. It could be their spiritual walk. It could be they're better at health and wellness than I am. It could be my finances are limited and terrible, and I need somebody to teach me what I'm doing in there. So that sometimes I think that's a way to do it. If you can't find that one person, you kind of mentor by committee helps a lot. And I think that's probably the situation I'm in at this point. Is there are actually a number of different people that I'll go to for different things because they handle those specific aspects of their life so well.
I think it's important to have that person, though, or that group of people that's maybe already done this ministry. Mm-hmm. They've been in ministry for a while, or they've been in youth ministry. And even though the culture that they were in might be different than the culture that you're in, there's still timeless principles that they can speak into your life.
People are the same. I mean, that's sins aren't new. Your spirit's not new. The battles in the church really aren't new. We think they are, but they're not. So just, I remember he actually just went to heaven this past week. There was an old man in one of the churches I was in, and he was, he'd been a pastor for 50 years and had kind of reached that point in his life where he was free to say anything that he wanted and nobody can say anything about it. And I remember just loving being with him and hearing this story. And it's funny because the stories he had over battles over music were like going from classical Beethoven music to organ music. And but it was the same battles, it was the same fights and the same cantankerous spirits, I guess.
Wow. So Jay, what do you do in your personal life? Obviously, part of your job is studying the Word of God, mm-hmm. interpreting it, preaching it to your students, helping them to live it out. But what do you do personally to make sure that you're staying in the Word, to make sure that you're refreshed, that your source of strength is from the Lord? Because what happens to a lot of guys in ministry is they get really excited about ministry and they end up burning themselves out and totally losing their own personal relationship with Jesus in the process. Yeah. So what are some things that you've done to kind of guard yourself against that?
Great question. And again, this, I think everybody's a little different, but everybody's going to have the same temptations. What works for you is going to be a little bit different, but the principles, I think, are the same. And so, one of those main things is you've got to be having time in the Word apart from lesson prep and studying for things. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be a devotional element to my lessons and my studies, but I'll cycle through different things. Like there'll be years where I'll commit to reading through the Bible in a year. A great program is the McShane Bible Reading Program, and that one you'll actually read through the Old Testament one time and the New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs twice in a year. So I've done that one. And then if I'll do that for a year, then the next year I might go very, very slow and just take my time going through. And so, go with commentaries. The other has been, and it's funny because the older I get, this is more challenging, but I'm more convinced of how important it is. I have a personal goal to have 15 chapters of the Bible memorized in the next 3 years. And so, there's a few from Romans that I really like. There's a couple Psalms. I'm working on the Sermon on the Mount, and it's really, really hard. But having these things, what I have found is that very passage that I'm working on memorizing, because it takes so much time to memorize that long passage versus a verse, it tends to speak to exactly what's going on in my life, whatever's going on in my life. And so that's been just some of the little things. And for me, truthfully, and I might say this over and over again in the questions, get up early. I have 4 kids in my house, so basically after 6:30 in the morning, there is no peace in my house until 9 o'clock at night. And so I do my best to get up at 5. I don't always get up at 5, but I do my best to get up at 5 and have just that alone time of prayer, and I stink at sitting in one spot and praying, so I'll get out and I'll mope around the circle of my neighborhood, walking my dog, and just pray for my neighbors, pray through the day, try to get my brain engaged, and then come back in and have personal time in the Word, again, apart from sermon prep and lesson prep and all those preps.
Thanks, Jay, man. We really appreciate you spending some time. And I think we're going to have you on one of these other lessons in the future weeks. So thanks, man.